Every time something changes in comic books, there will always be a tsunami of outcry. Worst thing ever has become the cattle call for any sort of change to the status quo, even when there's actually very little status quo to be had. This happens with reboots, shifts in directions, and the most common ticket to ride the hate train, the dreaded retcon. However, not all retcons have caused controversy. Some are actually responsible for some of the most beloved elements of our favourite comics, and I, Ewan, am here to tell you about some of the best ever to exist. So here are 10 unbelievable retcons that changed comics for the better. Number 10. Darth Vader knew about Luke Skywalker. Losing the expanded universe of Star Wars is still a touchy subject for many fans, what with Dark Horse's mythos having been expunged by Marvel's new wave of comics, but it's important to remember that a whole bunch of these new stories have been genuinely great, Darth Vader being a particular highlight. One of the most iconic moments came in Star Wars Darth Vader number 6, when Boba Fett tells Darth that he discovered the name of the pilot that blew up the first Death Star. Skywalker. After Boba Fett leaves, Darth Vader tries to contain his rage, but flashes of his past, with the death of Padme, some sand, presumably, and his children in his mind, mean he's unable to contain the power of the Force and cracks the glass in his space-bound office. The magnitude of the moment adds a whole new level of depth to all interactions between Vader and the Emperor from that point on, including a unique revelation when Emperor Palpatine tells Vader of his son, as both sides know that Vader already knows by that point. Number 9. Hal Jordan was possessed by Parallax. There has to be at least one controversial choice on this list, and hey, here it is. The setup for the story is that Coast City, Hal's home, is destroyed with all 7 million inhabitants killed. Hal goes a bit insane, understandably, and recreates the entire city as a projection from his ring, including his girlfriend and parents. The 90s were a weird time, we try not to judge. The Guardians, the leaders of the Green Lanterns, are not so happy about this and bring him back to Oa to reprimand him for using his ring in such a way. That goes over about as well as you can probably imagine, and Hal, in his anger, starts and eventually wins a war against the Green Lantern Corps, now calling himself Parallax. After the event where he tries to rewrite time, Hal sacrifices himself to save the solar system. Things were fine until 2004, when DC Comics decided that they wanted to bring Hal Jordan back as the Green Lantern with the Green Lantern Rebirth series. It was there that Jeff Johns retconned the whole Parallax fiasco to be Hal Jordan being possessed by a giant space bug comprised of yellow fear energy, thus kickstarting one of the most memorable DC runs in recent memory. Number 8. Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are Magneto's children. Magneto is the father of Pietro and Wanda Maximoff. It is an ingrained truth that has existed for the past 40 years, but it was never really stated explicitly until the Vision and Scarlet Witch series. Since the mid-70s, however, they have been Magneto's children explicitly. Magneto's wife, Magda, had fled to the Wundagore Mountains after her husband had developed strange powers. There, she gives birth to her twins and abandons them days later. The midwife attempts to give the kids to Robert Frank, the costumed speedster known as the Whizzer, after his own wife and child died during birth, but he ran off himself, so they were given to the Maximoff family in a local village. However, originally, Robert Frank was there with a real purpose. Instead of running off because his own wife and child died in a separate incident, the twins were actually his. In Giant Size Avengers number 1, the story is told to Wanda as the Wizard lay dying in Avengers Mansion. His wife, the Golden Age hero Miss America, gave birth on Wundagore Mountain but died days after giving birth to his twins and fled in grief at the loss of his wife. This was the status quo for a couple of years until the addition of Magneto tied Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver much closer to the extremely popular X-Men books. Number 7. Daredevil was trained by Stick. The hand, the chase, and stick are all fixtures of the Daredevil mythos. How else could a blind 15-year-old learn how to do all the kick-ass things that Daredevil can? Simply put, he taught himself. In the original Daredevil number 1, there was no stick and no grand design outside of a couple of panels of young Matt Murdock training himself how to fight. It wasn't until Frank Miller's The Man Without Fear that those fantastical ninja elements were incorporated into the character's backstory. Matt was struggling in his life due to his altered senses, and Stick came into the picture not necessarily to help him, but to train him as a weapon to fight against the Hand. The rest, as they say, is history. The Man Without Fear went on to become one of the defining Bibles in Daredevil's history, and there's a reason why the origin has stuck for as long as it has. Number 6. Wolverine's claws are a part of his mutation. Look, Len Wein did not, I repeat, did not want Wolverine to be a mutated Wolverine who was made human-like by the High Evolutionary. Such misinformation may get passed off elsewhere, but we here at What Culture like to fact-check our comments. Unless you happen to be Josh and can't tell how Darkseid is pronounced anyway. Roy Thomas just wanted a character who was a Canadian and was short, with the temperament of a Wolverine. So Len Wein wrote a human to be that way, with super strength, agility, and retractable claws, although the claws in question weren't shown to be retracting until his addition to the X-Men lineup. The retcon is that, originally, the now iconic claws were supposed to be in his gloves. His mutation was just the speed and strength, though fighting Hulk could easily imply he had the healing factor right from the very get-go. Seriously, for just 1 second, think about every story that has come about because of the claws being fused within Wolverine's skeleton, and you will understand why this changed comics for the better. That is, until Wolverine became an overused character that stole the spotlight from everyone. Well, we'll ignore that for 1 second, shall we? Number 5. Bucky Barnes never died. Originally, Bucky Barnes was deemed dead in the same secret rocket explosion that froze Steve Rogers in the Arctic Circle, and for the better part of 50 years, that was the rule. In the same way that Uncle Ben or the Waynes are dead to begin with, that was the case for James Buchanan Barnes. That is, until Ed Brubaker and Steve Epting flipped the script in 2005 with their wonderful little run on Captain America. A new secret history was given to Bucky. Now, after the explosion, Captain America's sidekick was found by a Russian submarine and taken to become the country's top assassin with a cool bionic arm. This led to not only a bit of a retcon for most of the war heroes in Marvel's library, but it did a lot more than that too. It gave fans the phenomenal Winter Soldier storyline and the star-spangled awesome that was the death of Captain America, where Bucky wielded the shield for a time. Number 4. Swamp Thing's anatomy lesson. Swamp Thing was a run-of-the-mill monster man in the beginning. Alec Holland was caught in an explosion, and as this is comics, he was transformed into a thing made from swamp plants. The book was well received for a time until it got cancelled for one reason or another. That is until 1982 when the Wes Craven Swamp Thing movie was greenlit. A second volume was launched to a warm reception, all about Alec needing to stop an evil child who may or may not be the Antichrist. Yet, despite this obviously brilliant premise, dipping sales meant the book was destined to succumb to cancellation too. In steps Alan Moore, a name you know you can trust about retconning previously established history, and things get intense. The biggest retcon that changed it all was that Alec Holland did die in the explosion. The Swamp Thing that would eventually emerge was actually animated vegetation that thought it was a man, which ended up being the first of many key changes to come. There were actually dozens of Swamp Things throughout the ages, combining all previous appearances into continuity and introducing the Parliament of Trees and the Green, the grand force that connected all plant life. That by itself has become a giant addition to DC continuity. Number 3. Alfred was always there. Alfred Pennyworth first appeared in Batman number 16 as a bumbling fat valet who came to work for Bruce Wayne after a deathbed promise from his father Jarvis and merely stumbled into the discovery of the Batcave. This was definitely not the same gun-toting, witty Alfred we all grew up with. His dim-witted nature, despite being part of British intelligence, was only the tip of the iceberg with every Master Bruce they wrote for him. Luckily, Alfred would be changed to fit more in line with the actor from the 1943 Batman serial, with a lean frame and a mustache that would become his iconic look. Then Crisis on Infinite Earths happened, and the opportunity shifted so that Alfred Pennyworth was always the valet for the Wayne family, and, upon their death, became Bruce's sole guardian. Number 2, Captain America was frozen in ice. The Marvel Universe has revolved around the fact that Captain America was frozen towards the end of World War II for some time now. His solo series, the epic of Civil War where he stands against the government, that other time he quit being Captain America by standing against the government and Richard Nixon in particular, everything hinged on his idealism as it stood at the end of World War II, when there was a clear definition of who the bad guys were and why they needed to be stopped. Except that wasn't always the case. Long ago, after World War II ended, Timely Comics still published Captain America Adventures, except now he was a school teacher with a young sidekick called Golden Girl. It didn't do so well. But then came a new quote-unquote threat to the foreground of the American conscience: communism. So Timely got Stan Lee and John Romita Sr. to create tales trying to capture the same spark as the character's Nazi punching days, with Golden Girl out as his sidekick and Bucky back in. Seeing as how it packed all the political nuance as Joseph McCarthy's fictitious list, it wasn't exactly successful. But then the 60s swung around and the Marvel Age had taken root. This time, Lee and Kirby came up with the means to bring Captain America back and bypass the awkward commie-smashing years. Cap was actually frozen in ice and Bucky was dead by the end of World War II. That Cap running around punching commies? Oh, that was just an obsessed fanboy who decided to try and be the character for a while. A premise that would eventually inform one of the best stories from the aforementioned Brubaker and Epting run. Number 1. The DC Multiverse. The Silver Age of comics brought about a total reboot to the known works of DC, beginning with a new Flash, Barry Allen, in Showcase number 4 in 1956. The success brought about Silver Age versions of older established characters like Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, but they weren't nearly the same as their Golden Age counterparts. In fact, in Barry Allen's case, the Golden Age Flash, Jay Garrick, was just a comic book character. All that changed, however, in Flash number 123, Flash of Two Worlds. Flash of Two Worlds introduced the concept that Jay Garrick wasn't just a fictional comic book character, but was in fact an active hero on a parallel Earth, dubbed creatively Earth 2. This comic became a massive success, and suddenly yearly crossovers between the Justice League of America and the Justice Society of Earth 2 became the norm. This then exploded out into other universes, such as Earth 3 with the villainous Ultramen and the Crime Syndicate of America, or Earth X, where the Quality Comics characters would stay battling in a world where Nazis won the Second World War. The Elseworlds that came out of this story, the legacy heroes that became so integral to the DC universe, and even the crisis events that would alter the multiverse after, to call this comic essential would be putting things lightly.